school children, white schoolgirls, were groomed by gangs. Many of them British, Muslim British Pakistani, who stood outside their schools and tried to pick them up, groom them, and then raped them. And they went through brutal incidents. And obviously, they've naturally recovered, but there's also a lack of effort from the side of the government, from the side of the media, to question what happened, because this was ongoing since decades. And this again follows. I'm bringing up a different incident, but this does follow a history of honor killings in England, especially in London. So these are women and children who seem to suffer at the hands of Muslims who refuse to integrate into British society. So, how did you, understand this? What was your takeaway in terms of how this came to be, and what would you like to see done in these cases?
Yeah, so obviously the case of grooming gangs is considered to be an open secret that Britain is currently grappling with. It's been happening for a number of decades, and in fact, there's even instances where it was happening in the 70s, and there was a particular attitude that that was found within some of these communities. Now, Rotherham is one of the towns that is at the heart of this grooming gang scandal. There are also other towns such as Telford and Rochdale, as well Huddersfield, Halifax, Oxford, High Wycombe. So lots of these areas have, or what it seems to be, a particular problem in terms of a particular group of men who happen to be British Pakistani Muslims in most cases, targeting underage white working class girls who were obviously at school. So there are some caveats that need to be, first of all, established, is that no one's saying that this is a particular problem that is associated with British Pakistani communities. No one is also saying that only white working class girls are the victims of this type of grooming. And also, no one is saying that, what could have been done wasn't always necessarily done. What we found was that in terms of the data collection of these perpetrators, that wasn't done properly. And so it left us just looking at what was going on in terms of what was coming out in the media. And so we saw that there was a pattern now. We saw that there were gangs of British Pakistani men who were targeting these girls, and they were targeting them because they were, first of all, vulnerable, the girls. They came from low income families. And when you come from a low income family, you then present some sense of vulnerability, and that means that if your needs can be met by someone else, then it's very likely that you may seek out that need from them. So, if, for example, in many of these cases where some of the girls were not able to go home and have their supper, they would then need to eat from somewhere, and these men were able to buy them some chicken and chips, and and feed them. And so when you're being fed by someone, you feel like you're being taken care of. And when you feel like you're being taken care of, you sometimes may feel like you owe the person something. And these men were very shrewd in that sense. They knew what they were doing. They were, fulfilling some of these needs, because for a lot of them, they were working in the nighttime economy. They were working in restaurants, takeaways. They were taxi drivers. Some of them were drug dealers as well. And they saw that a lot of these girls were coming from broken homes. Some of them obviously didn't, but a lot of them came from broken homes. And so they obviously presented a vulnerability, and that vulnerability was obviously exploited by these men. It's also worth pointing out that this is not necessarily paedophilia. Paedophilia would be more a case of that they're being targeted because they are children, whereas in this case, it's more of the fact that they are targeting them because it's because of their vulnerabilities, because it's an opportunity to be able to obviously to get these girls. And also, finally, the other aspect is that there was an element of racism and classism. So, they would look at these girls being white, and they would say things like "gandhi gori," so dirty white person or white girl, and that's how they would view them. Because as far as they were concerned, these girls were not, clean, not worthy of respect, that perhaps other members of their own community were. And so that's what they were doing. And then what you found is that it's probably happened in a way like this. So you have one individual who gains the trust of one of these girls and then begins the exploitation of her. And then, as part of that exploitation, he brings in his friends or his family members. And then, what they then expect of the girl is to then bring in some of her friends or even family members as well. And it starts to spiral out of control, and it becomes a whole culture of this is what's going on. Girls are being raped by predominantly British Pakistani men. The caveat, obviously, we know that it happens in other communities or with other perpetrators, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about specifically British Pakistani men doing this. And so, we should focus on that, and we should be able to ask the question of why this is happening. And we actually found out that why this was allowed to continue to happen was because of an institutional failure. So I'm sure you're aware of the GB News documentary by Charlie Peters, a great journalist, investigative journalist, who really got to the heart of what was going on in Rotherham, and also exposing some of what was happening in some of the other towns and cities around the country. And he found that as part of the institutional failure, what people were doing, the people who were tasked with obviously protecting these girls, were not actually protecting them, because they shared some of what the perpetrators shared in terms of how they viewed these girls. So, some of the police would also look at them as council estate scum, for example, quote unquote, council estate scum, and they probably deserve it, or that's exactly what they were going to do. And this is quite scandalous, because the law in this country is the welfare of the child is paramount, the Children Act. And they were clearly letting down those girls because they had that view. And now whilst they had that view of the victims, they also had a view of the perpetrators. And that view of the perpetrators was that, well, we can't raise this issue, because if we raise this issue, then we could be accused of racism or Islamophobia or any other kind of ism. And it's probably best not to tackle this head on and to bury it under the carpet, so that we don't cause any community tension, which is obviously scandalous. But that's where we are in terms of those perpetrators, the institutional failures. Again, it was the same with some of the social workers who were obviously tasked with dealing with these girls. Schools were failing them. So there was institutional failure because of fear of racism and the way they viewed the girls. And then there was also the perpetrators, and this is specific to this group of perpetrators who happen to be British Pakistani men going after these girls.